First of all, I'd just like to welcome everyone to this non-academic careers panel event. As many of you know, my name is Evan Chunga, and I am a third-year Gerontology PhD student and a part of the SPO Honor Society, which is sponsoring today's event. So before we get started, I'd please ask that everyone just mute their mics. And if at any point you have any questions or comments, that you just put them in the chat and we'll review those. So now I'd just like to introduce our gracious moderator, Marc Cohen.
Thanks so much, Evan. It's great to see everybody. I'm Marc Cohen. I'm a co-director of the LeadingAge LTSS Center at UMass Boston. And like our panelists, I took a fairly circuitous route after getting my PhD and worked for many years in the private sector, founding a healthcare and long-term care research and risk management company, and then came to UMass in 2016 to start the LTSS Center with colleagues in Washington, D.C. So we're really fortunate today to have four really dynamic speakers who I know that you're going to learn a lot from. I'm going to just give a one or two sentence introduction and then let each of them talk for a few minutes about their career path. Then we're going to turn it to some questions that we hope will be beneficial to you. Many of the questions came from you all ahead of time. So first, let me begin with Michelle Washko. Michelle, if you can raise your hand or wave. Michelle, who's a national expert on the healthcare workforce, currently serves as a director of the National Center for Health Workforce Analysis, located in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The center is responsible for providing health workforce information and data for the development of national and state policies. Next, we have Hayley Gleason, one of our own graduates. Hayley also. Hayley is the Strategic Outcomes Division Director within the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing, Colorado State Medicaid Agency. In this role, she oversees the strategic direction, stakeholder engagement, and cost and quality outcomes of the Office of Community Living, which oversees all Medicaid long-term services and supports in the state. Next, we have Varina Simiralli. And Verena is a Senior Health Services Research Associate in the Washington, D.C. office of the LeadingAge LTSS Center at UMass Boston. Verena's work focuses on identifying psychosocial challenges faced by older adults with chronic illness and their adaptation to these various challenges. And last but not least, Joel Weissman is a Deputy Director and Chief Scientific Officer of the Center for Surgery and Public Health at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, and a Professor of Surgery and Health Policy at Harvard Medical School. Joel has published over 200 peer-reviewed articles on quality and patient safety, the care of underserved and seriously ill populations, payment policy, comparative effectiveness research policy, and surgical health services research. So what we're going to do is I'm going to begin and ask Michelle to talk briefly, introduce herself briefly, and we'll go through each of the four speakers in the order that I just did, and then we'll turn it to questions. So Michelle, why don't you kick us off?
Sure, thank you so much, Marc. And thank you, everyone. It's lovely to be here today, wherever you all are. Yeah, I think like Marc, I took a rather circuitous route to end up where I am today, but I can confidently say, and I think Jan and Jeff would probably agree with me, that even in my time at UMass in the doctoral program, I was never interested in going the academic route. And my research, my dissertation lent itself to that. And even right out of the gate, my first job was at, well, it was then ASA, but now LeadingAge with Robin Stone. So I immediately jumped right from the doctoral program at UMass right into policy. And honestly, that was what attracted me to UMass in the first place, was I knew that I enjoyed and wanted to further develop my research skill set, but I also loved applied research and policy. And I was a firm believer, although I didn't fully realize it at the time, that I feel that program and policy in the US should be based in an evidence base. And so that's really been the theme throughout my entire career. After LeadingAge, I moved on to the federal government, the executive branch, where I was in the Department of Labor for a time, the Administration on Aging, which then became Administration for Community Living, until I finally landed where I am now. And each step along the way, my career infused, it kept turning back between research and then braiding it with policy. And so for me, I think that, you know, there was no roadmap. There was no one that said, this is how you make a non-academic career. I simply followed my heart and my interests. So that's it. And today I'm the director of the National Center for Health Workforce Analysis. And that actually still goes back to my work at UMass, which my dissertation was in productive aging and volunteerism. And the two bodies of research, if you will, that have always marked my career are the employment of older adults, but also the parts of our workforce in this economy that affect older adults, hence health workforce. So I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Really, that was perfect. Hayley, could you go ahead and speak?
Sure. Thanks, Mark. And actually, my background and what I was going to say is very similar to what Michelle said. You know, I came into the program having worked in a memory care and assisted living community. I was the administrator there, and in that experience, realized the impact of policy on the care that older adults receive, and in particular, I had a focus on the workers, the direct care workforce, and those who were providing care within my assisted living, and decided that I again wanted to pursue my PhD and picked UMass really because of the policy bend, and realizing that I could get both those research skills and the training in policy, with the goal of being able to make an impact, greater impact, by influencing policy. So that really led me to UMass, and over my career, I've worked in basically all different long-term care industries. I've been in home care, I did assisted living, worked in adult day programs, and so had just sort of this spectrum of experience related to long-term care, and in the end ended up finding my way to the state Medicaid agency here in Colorado. I started out as the older adult policy advisor, so I advised the department and really looking at all of our policies for how we served older adults and thinking about how we could improve those policies and rules. And then moved into my most recent role, which is more of a strategic role. And I love my current job because it, like Michelle said, it's this way of sort of braiding the research, the outcomes, the metrics piece. And so using kind of my research brain with the strategy and more like applied side, and linking it all together with that policy bend. So I I've done a lot of different things in my career, but I have found a way, and I think that my PhD has really been integral to where I've been able to end up, and really landing in a role that's just this great complement of all of the different pieces.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Hayley. I forgot to mention that a number of our speakers have requested that if you're comfortable and don't mind, especially when we get to the questions, turning your videos on so they can feel somewhat like they're relating directly to you, that would be great. Only if you're comfortable and don't mind. Verena, I'm going to ask you to go next.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for organizing this. I was very excited to be invited. I am not a graduate of UMass Boston's Gerontology program, but I'll tell you a little bit, the short story of my career.
We're not holding that against you. Don't worry.
But I was, I'm originally from Austria, not that this really, but I came here on an exchange program, and I was studying, focusing on psychology as an undergraduate. And I had sort of had a little bit of a clinical interest. Everybody who studies psychology thinks about getting a PhD in clinical psychology. And then I started doing research with a professor as an undergraduate, and I realized very quickly that that really fit my personality and that that's something that I wanted to do. So I was at that point asking myself, what do I want to do in 10 years from now, right? Would I still be happy doing research, not knowing the full extent of, what it means to conduct research? And then I decided I'm gonna pursue a PhD, not in clinical psychology, but in applied developmental psychology, which at the time was sort of a new discipline. And it is described as a discipline that integrates developmental theory with research to promote positive development in individuals, families, and communities, right? So I thought this is perfect for me. So I went into this program, I got accepted, and at the time when I entered the program, I had no idea what age group I wanted to work with. And then the program that I was in was actually geared towards training psychologists to be researchers and not necessarily to go towards the academic route. So we had to do internships and a year-long practicum. And then also my assistantship was not a university-based assistantship. It was at a research institute of a large vision rehabilitation agency. So I was able, so I started working there during my second and third year. And that sort of really, just the experiences, and that's when I started working with older people, in the research, as research participants. And for me, it was just so interesting to interview them, to go to their houses and to learn about them, and to meet a 100-year-old person who still lives in the community. And also to sort of be part of a research group and have these mentors working with you like very closely, almost like on a daily basis. And then after I was done with my coursework, we just got a study funded, and I was a project coordinator, and I was able to use or do data collection as part of that study, that the data that I then used for my dissertation. So that, and then I stayed at that agency at that research institute for about, I think, 10 years. And then I actually was working for the New Jewish Home, which is a large geriatric healthcare organization serving older adults in New York City, one of a LeadingAge member. And that's when I started to focus on research relating to nursing home quality of care and quality of life. And then in 2018, I joined LeadingAge's LTSS Center at UMass Boston. And you know all about that partnership. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Verena. Joel, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I want to make sure that you have screen controls.
Great. I will share my screen in a moment. Before I start, I'll give just a couple of things. One is full disclosure. Marc and I met in graduate school. We went to the Heller School together. We shared an office. My dog stole a sandwich, and that was the beginning of a great relationship. The other is that, unlike the three previous folks who are not in academia, I started in private sector, went to academia, went to the government sector, and now I'm back in academia. So because I'm an academic, I can't help but show some slides. So let me show some slides. Can people see that? Yeah, everybody can see it, and I don't know if it.
Yes, looks good, Joel.
I don't think I'm going to. Sometimes when I make it full screen, then I lose. Oh no, that works. All right, okay, all right. So I'm going to tell you about my 2 years making health policy for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And first, though, why people leave academia. And, you know, I always tell the story, God never received tenure at any university. He only had one major publication. It wasn't Hebrew. It wasn't published in a refereed journal. It had no references. We weren't sure he wrote it himself. We can't replicate his results. He never got permission from the IRB. And although there were only 10 requirements, most students failed. So, you know, there's a good reason to leave academia. It's not that easy, and not everybody is actually something that they really enjoy. Anyway, I just wanted to start with that. So there's a lot of good reasons for leaving, or maybe never even joining it. So, you know, I'm even older than Mark. So I've been around a lot and done a lot of different things. And so I tried to sort of squeeze my career just on this one slide. I started out with a Master's of City Planning from MIT in a social policy track, which, by the way, is essential was eventually discontinued. I traveled in Europe for 6 months. That was great. I highly recommend it to anybody who can take lots of time off. I had a bunch of jobs, and then finally, somebody told me about the Heller School Pew Scholars Program. This is where I met Mark. A few years later, when I was ABD, all but dissertation, I got my first job in a large consulting firm. I hated it. You know, it wasn't really academic. It was really just about pushing out products, and, you know, I don't even know why they hired me, because I had no experience working in a situation like that. So I escaped after 3 months. I had bought a new car to commute to there and sold that 3 months later, and then became project director at the Harvard School of Public Health. About 10 years later, I became project director at the Mass General Hospital Mongan Center for Health Policy. And what's interesting, and I often have to remind my staff, because it's been so long, you know, when I tell them, like, you know, what to do as a project director, I was a project director. I kind of came in as a faculty backdoor, which you can do in the hospitals. There wasn't a national search. I was a project director, but I started publishing and getting grants. And so they said, "Oh, you want to join the faculty?" I go, "Okay, sure." So that's how I got a faculty appointment. And then in 2008, the Secretary of Executive Office of Health and Human Services called me. I got the receptionist got me on the phone, said, "Joel, Dr. Judy Ann Bigby's on the phone for you." And I go, "Really? Okay." And she said, "Joel, she just started her job there a couple months before, and she said she was interested in having me come and being a senior health policy advisor." And I checked with a lot of people, and so I did it. I spent 2 years, and then 2010 came back to academia, and I've been there ever since. So that's my circuitous route. So let me tell you about the difference that I see between the two. This is me, and by the way, you can see that this is a much younger picture. This was me as a health policy researcher. I get to write proposals. I deal a lot with IRBs. I do teaching and mentoring. I had some exotic traveling. You know, I did workshops in Singapore. I did consulting in Puerto Rico. I got to do a lot of publications. I wrote a book, falling through the safety net. So, you get to do all that academic type stuff. But when I was with the state government, that's me there. If you can see that, senior health policy advisor. And, it was a totally different experience. I really was actually, for the first 6 months or so, kind of like a deer in headlights. But what was really great about that particular position, which I think is somewhat different than most people experience in government, is I walked in on the first day and I asked Dr. Bigby, what is it that you want me to do? And she said, "I want you to think big thoughts. And, how can we transform health policy in the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?" And I took about a month or so and really just kind of thought about all kinds of health policy. I also used to say that as you could tell from Mark's introduction, is that I also do a lot of poke in a lot of different areas of health policy. And I always say that my dilettante past paid off. And I decided that the thing that we could do without blowing up the system that would make the most difference would be to promote patient-centered medical homes, which was actually sort of a novel concept back in 2008. And that's what I did, started a statewide initiative around that. So, as health policy advisor, I had a multi-billion-dollar budget. I had direct access to the EOHHS secretary. I had, application of research to the real world. I met a lot of new people. I had an opportunity to tell insurance companies what to do, which was great. I had some travel, and I get to wear a suit every day. And I like to say I was like a pig in mud. It was really a lot of fun and really enriching and invigorating. So that was, just great. And this is, if I had to, I was just looking through all my old slides, and this is one that I loved because, if there's one thing that I learned when I was trying to, do some health reform in Massachusetts was everybody has a finger in the pie. There are so many stakeholders. There's the Health Care Quality Cost Council. There's this thing called Mass Health Quality Partners. There's the eHealth Institute. There was payment reform commissions. I just spent, a lot of my life going from stakeholder to stakeholder, sort of promoting what we were trying to do and convince them to be on board, because you didn't really want anybody creating a roadblock. Unfortunately, what I was suggesting was kind of mom and apple pie. Who wouldn't be in favor of expanding primary care? And so, we were actually pretty expensive. Actually, the one place that's kind of reneged after a while was Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. They didn't want to spend all the money, but they still supported it partly. So just to close, public policy versus academia. Some of these guys said public policy is whatever governments choose to do or not to do. That's really what it is. And the definition covers government action, inaction, decisions, non-decisions, and it implies a deliberate choice between alternatives, although, as the other people on the panel can tell you, not necessarily. We like to think that we can do some evidence-based decisions, but it doesn't always work that way. And I always thought, when I was there, my state health reform experience was a lot like putting together a large federal grant. It's lots of negotiations, a lot of egos, a lot of contracts, ideas, but the actors are different. The dollars are a lot bigger. You never say or write the words p-value. None of my proposals in the government involve p-values, and your salary doesn't necessarily depend on the outcome. So that's my experience. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joel. That's terrific. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question, and I'd like each of you to answer it. I'll start. Our first question will be for Michelle, but I'd like all of you to just answer it as succinctly as possible. Like, what were the factors that encouraged you to follow a non-academic career path? And was there an influential person or event that inspired you to follow a certain career path?
There wasn't one event. There was definitely a lot of people, mentors and others, but it was also a bit of what Joel was touching on in his comments just now, which is I am a risk taker. So for me, a non-defined path was attractive, and it still is that way in my career. For me, there was something really interesting and cool about being able to set out and do something that maybe no one else would do, and I wasn't beholden to needing to necessarily get grants or publish or perish or those kind of responsibilities. So for me, that was just such a large pool, more than any one event. I will say, for me, there was a specific pull towards federal policy, because as Joel mentioned, the dollars are big. And when I entered the federal government, someone said to me that, yes, federal policy making, it's big money, it's a lot of work, and it takes forever. But boy, when you can actually make a difference, the ripple effects are huge. And that always stuck with me. That's been with me the past 15 years, and why I can't envision myself not working on federal policy. Just the ability to make change on such a huge national, and actually with what my center does now, I represent us at the WHO, so on a global scale. So for me, that was
Great.
That was it.
Thanks, Michelle. Hayley, same question. What encouraged you to follow the non-career path?
Sure. Well, I think in my intro, I mentioned working at the assisted living and feeling like I really wanted to have a greater impact. And I think that was really what drew me to this all along. I got my master's in social work right out of college, and I went that route because I felt like I wanted to be able to make an impact and make a difference for people and be able to see that impact. And I think you know, I realized quickly in my first couple of jobs that I wanted something bigger. You know, I liked, you know, for example, that assisted living, you know, being able to make changes within those four walls, but I wanted to be able to do more. And to me, policy is the place where you can really make change that impacts people's lives. And so that is really what drove me and continues to drive me. I worked for a nonprofit all through my graduate school experience at UMass, and I really enjoyed that as well. And I still was able to feel like I had that impact that I wanted. But I have to say, working at a nonprofit, especially a nonprofit, can get exhausting with the always looking for more money and having to fund yourself and everything you want to do. And so, you know, going the more state government policy route, you know, it had the best of both worlds, where I was able to have an influence on policy decisions that then it does take a while, but eventually, you know, you can see are really having an impact on people's lives. So that's what really drove me to go this direction.
Wonderful. Thanks, Hayley. Verena.
Yeah, I think, yeah. So I think now we've identified 3 career paths: academic, research in nonprofits, and government, right? So for me, it was, like I said before, I really enjoyed working with older people, and but it was also because the applied research that we do is so you know, you feel like you make a difference. So, you know, we're really, you know, at the LTSS Center preaching research with policy and practice. And for me, the gratifying aspect of my work is when we can, based on our, you know, research, can design interventions or models of care that, you know, we then test out and that somebody adopts, and hopefully the sustained adoption. But that's how I feel like, you know, I make a difference. And you get to work with a lot of great people. And also, you know, when comparing it, and I was never in academia because I sort of was always on this wave that I didn't get off because opportunities opened up for me along the way. And I thought about academia, right? But I realized that you can actually do, if you work for a nonprofit doing applied research, you do a lot of the same things, but you don't have the large responsibility of teaching, I don't know, students, 200 students with 200 classes with 200 students intro psych, right? You mentor, you have interns that you know that you teach. So I sort of felt like I always had the advantages of academia without the pressure of getting tenure. Although you have the pressure of, and I always experienced as a pleasant pressure that you have to go out there and you have to get, I mean, you have to write grants and get money, but you know, you want to do that anyway. So publishing is also very important. And also another aspect that I really like about my job, and that I now started doing more of again since I started with LeadingAge, is not just dissemination to you know via peer-reviewed journals, but publications that, for example, our aging services providers can use in their work. So yeah, so.
Great. Joel, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to actually move on, given your first answer, I'm going to move on to a second question, which is that when you think about PhD programs, most of them are oriented toward producing academics, even at the Heller School, with most of the non-classroom activities like conferences, publishing articles, attending speaker series, geared toward the needs of the academic job market and academic professional development. For those who, already know that they don't want to go into academia, were there activities, extracurricular activities that you found, particularly useful or less useful? And then I'll ask your fellow panelists.
The answer to the first, no. I didn't, and I'll tell you why. And the less useful ones, the classes we had in deriving statistical theorems, you just, you don't use, and I don't even use it in academia. So I found those less useful. I'll tell you that the one thing I wish doctoral programs would do would be to teach people, first of all, to give people some background in project management, especially if you go into non-academia, you're going to run big, you're probably going to run projects or be part of projects. And there are a lot of useful tools. And at the same time, personnel. I know, Mark, you used to talk about when you ran a big company, that was like what you spent a lot of your time on. We were woefully unprepared for that, and I'm still learning, how to sort of deal with that. I will just, say one thing about, kind of impact is that, when you're in academia, I think another difference is the impact you feel is much longer term, right? So to give you all an example is that I started my career studying limited access to care by the uninsured. And it was so novel. People really thought that everybody who was uninsured still had all the same access to care. And my first paper that I published on my own, I got on CNN News. Haven't been on CNN News since. They thought it was just this remarkable thing. And it took 20 years to get to Massachusetts, and another 5 or 6 years, or 7 or 8 years to get national, for people to kind of recognize that. So the payoff is much longer. And that's, that's something which you sort of have to put up with. The other thing is, I really did fantasize about maybe spending half my time in government and half my time in academia. Really hard to do. The only person I know who could stay in non-academia and publish the heck out of things is this person, Dr. Cohen, who published more in a non-academic setting than a lot of my colleagues did in academic settings. I don't know how he did it, but now he doesn't have that other stuff, and he does a whole ton of stuff. So, it's there are a lot of trade-offs. And then I'll say one more thing, and all the people, the other reason that I went and did this is that somebody was talking about risk taking. Yeah, there certainly was a risk. So everybody should take some risks, right? If you don't take risks, it's not kind of worth doing. The other is, I tell people, in the middle of your career, it's time to sharpen the saw. I don't care what you're doing, you get in a rut, you get comfortable. It gets easy for you, or easier, do something different. And it really changed kind of my whole outlook when I came back to academia, and I learned a lot, and, just get out there and do something different at some point in your career.
Great. Thank you, Joel. So Michelle, for people who know they don't want to go into academia, what extracurricular activities were less useful to your career, more useful, anything?
I think they were all useful, right? Because if you're, and I kind of thinking about what Hayley said earlier about putting on her research hat in her job, when you go and present at a conference, you're learning soft skills, right? You're learning how to speak in a public forum. If you're publishing articles, you're learning how to write and translate and get a message across. So all the activities are good. And I still do a lot in my job, even though I'm not even doing research anymore. I'm funding research. I'm running a large research center. I still publish papers on the side. I still go and I get asked to speak. Yeah, a lot of time now it's higher level briefings, it is conferences, and your keynotes and things like that. But those are all the skills you get from, you share those when you're going on an academic career versus non-academic. The one thing I think that would have been helpful in retrospect, and it's so simple, but it was the difference between a resume and a CV. You know, it's a really basic thing, but it's something that you don't talk about too much until you're actually in, for example, a non-academic job search, and you realize that they don't want to see your CV. They want a 3-page, high level, that's it. So that is one thing I wish I had spent a little bit more time understanding from the outset. But I think everything else you know, some of the soft skills you gain, you're going to use them through your whole career.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Hayley, any thoughts about this question? And then
Yeah,
go ahead.
I totally agree with Michelle. I mean, I think there's so much value in the conferences, the papers, you know, all of those activities, whether it's public speaking or networking or the writing, all time management, you know, all of those things that you need to have no matter what job you end up in. I do think there are some other skills that maybe aren't as, you know, as readily available in the sort of academic extracurriculars that you have access to, like project management that Joel mentioned. I also think one that I was so lucky to gain working with Jan Mutchler at the Gerontology Institute was around working with stakeholders. So I think whether you're in academia or not, like that interaction with the public and working with external stakeholders and building relationships, and that was, you know, those skills that I learned and was able to practice in that role, I use every day in my job now. So I think that's a really important one that you may need to seek out. You know, you need to find opportunities to really work with stakeholders. Because I think that's a really important skill.
Wonderful. Thanks, Hayley. I'm going to pick up on that and move us along. So, Verena, I have a question based on, I guess, what everyone, your fellow panelists have said. Do you think that there's something that a PhD program could do to help students prepare better for a non-academic job? We've heard about, you know, project management, working with stakeholders, even how to turn a academic CV resume into a resume and so on. Is there anything that you can think of that might have helped?
I think what was very helpful for me was that we were encouraged as in my program to actually work in applied research settings. So like I mentioned, I had an assistantship that was not university based. I worked at a research institute. We had to do a year-long practicum at a research institute, because that's not just helpful in terms of skill building, but also because you make the connections, you have contacts. And the 3 jobs that I had in my career, I all got because I knew somebody from. So, and it's also helpful. You go then, whatever, you go to GSA, you know people there, they introduce you to more people. So really, building relationships with people who are in an applied setting is very important. But I think what a program can do, we sometimes had this issue that we had to do a lot. We had to be self-starters and sometimes go out and seek out a practicum in an area that we wanted to work in. So it was not like it was set up for us. But I think it would be helpful if a program, you know, was working with, you know, institutes in applied settings to offer that to students. That's, yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Verena. We're going to move to a different topic area now, under sort of a set of questions under job search strategies and insights. You guys have all had really interesting careers, and they're still unfolding. Some of us are near the tail end, others at the beginning. And so I'm thinking for our students who already know that they want to pursue a non-academic job, what advice do you have? Verena, you just talked about the role of networks in applied research for helping to prepare. Michelle, what advice do you have in this regard, especially with networks?
Yeah, networking. I've gotten every job I've had because of who I knew and my skills, obviously. But but you find out about the opportunities that way, you know. And you can't undersell people skills, right? In any job you go for, you're going to use them. So yeah, I'm with Verena. It's networking.
Great, thanks. Joel, do you want to add anything?
Sure. You know, I would think networking is the right word, but it's also about, at least in my case, getting involved in as many activities and committees and whatever as possible. Get your name out there. And, you know, a lot of times the jobs will come to you. Which is sort of interesting, you know, at some point, not, you know, maybe not right out of your graduate program, although maybe so if you're well known. And so that's what I would say. And of course, you know, just generally, and I think this is true whether you're looking for academic work or not, you know, every interview, every application you make, you should put forth your best effort, and just, you know, because you never know what it's going to turn into. So always take it really seriously. You know, you got to outperform everybody else.
Thanks, Joel. Hayley, would you like to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing. I think what's important when you're thinking about and preparing to pursue a job is be ready to sell yourself. I think a lot of people, I'm sure you've experienced it. You say you're getting your PhD in gerontology and they say, what is that? So, you know, not only will people maybe not know what that is, but they're not going to be just know off the top of their head what kind of skills you're going to bring to the table and how that translates to a more applied job outside of academia. So I think you need to tell them what you bring. You know, what is it that makes you the best candidate, and how does your PhD and your experience, how will that benefit this organization, and what will you bring? So I think, you know, more than maybe other degrees, you will have to kind of explain what it is that you can add, what value you can add with this degree.
And also, if I may add, it's also important to remind your network when you are where you are at in the process, right? Because if Molly says to me, I'm looking for a job now, I'm on the job market, then I keep my ears and eyes open, right? But if I know she's still, you know, writing the dissertation for another 2 to 3 years, then she's not going to be on my radar screen for that. You know, so it's, and people don't necessarily remember where you are at, or even if they have a very positive experience with you. And they,
very good advice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Verena. You know, I just want to add something actually all of you said really rings true. I remember in just starting a company and getting involved in a whole nother sector, I had, at some point, I sort of felt like the PhD was almost a disadvantage, because not a disadvantage, but it was very strange for where I was, what I was doing at the time in the private sector. And what I used to tell people is that what they should glean from the fact that I got a PhD was A, that I have the discipline to start something and finish it. That's not something that should be taken for granted across the board. And number two, that it made me, having the PhD made me a better consumer of a lot of different information, that it would be much harder to pull something over on me if somebody threw a statistical study at me, or an article that tries to prove that, you know, one intervention is better than another. Having that background makes one a better consumer of that sort of information. So I appreciate what you guys said, and it really rings true. You know, another question, and I'm going to start with you, Hayley. Do you think that engaging in a postdoctoral fellowship position would be a good strategy if you're going to prepare for a non-academic job? And why, if so, or why not?
Yeah, so I think that's really hard to say, like just a blanket yes or no. It really depends on where you want to go with your career. And what the fellowship is. So I think you really just have to take the time to take a step back and look at the experiences that you've had thus far. What did you like? what did you enjoy? What did you not like? What are you hoping to achieve in your career? Think about your goals, and then really decide if that makes sense. And that is if whether or not that fellowship is going to move you closer to getting that job that you want in the end. So I think you always just have to have that front of mind, like, what are my goals and is this going to help me get there?
Michelle, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I agree totally, Hayley. It really depends on the situation. I can tell you one thing that, well, in my own experience and the people that I've hired. So, when I finished my PhD, I was not ready to sort of go into academia. I didn't want to do that, the chasing after grants and publishing and all that kind of stuff. And I had little kids on the way and all that sort of thing. And so it really gave me time to sort of just get my legs. And I think allowed me to do anything I wanted to do. And I continue when I have a big research project. Some people hire research assistants. I hire ABDs and PhDs. And people like me who are not ready to go into academia or something like that, but might think about it in the future. And they come and they work for me and they run these big projects. And sometimes they go into academia and sometimes they go somewhere else, into government or something. So I think, you have to sort of look at your own life situation. So I'm not thinking professionally here. I'm thinking, work-life balance. It's sort of a nice landing spot for a while, and it worked out for me. So I liked it.
Thanks, Joel. Michelle, did you want to add anything? And then Verena?
Yeah, just that, a postdoc is still a job. So to what Hayley's point, if it's going to get you to where you want or need to go, then it's the right path at the end of the day. So if you think about it from that perspective, it's about a stepping stone. And Joel, I like what you said about the work-life balance piece too. That is a big thing to consider. And a reason why myself, as a woman and now mother, in addition to being very, I'm a risk taker. I did like a non-academic career. For me, I saw a lot of opportunities for work-life balance, and it has actually played out that way, despite having virtual children in school. Sorry, not virtual children, children in virtual school. Sometimes I wish they're virtual.
Yeah, I agree with Michelle that it's still, especially when you are looking to have a non-academic career, a postdoc is still a job. So I think it's actually, it would be, I also know students that I worked with that are now in the postdoc phase, and they, like one of them has a postdoc at Weill Cornell Medical here, and it's actually a 2-year postdoc, and they are encouraging her to write a K award. So they are supporting her, so that if that works out, she would go into academia, right? So what I'm trying to say is, like, it was my impression that would give you some leeway to make that decision. And I think that's also what Joel was hinting to, is it academia or not? So,
Great.
Anyway.
Good. So let me ask you, what do you think the non-academic employers are looking for in job candidates that have PhDs, especially like a degree in gerontology or in aging studies? What do you think, what was your impression going through your processes? And I'll start with Hayley and Michelle, who actually have degrees in gerontology. Hayley, you want to kick it off?
Sure. So I think, I can speak to what the department was looking for when they hired me in my first position, the advisor on aging. So I think they were really looking for someone who could come in and have a deep but broad understanding of older adults. And specifically, they were looking for experience and knowledge around long-term care. And I think, they wanted someone who could advise on policy, so could take a critical look at current policy and sort of look to the future and say, where should we be going in terms of serving older adults? Another key component was being connected to the aging network and the aging stakeholders across the state. So I think, you know, to lots of people's points, the speaker's points around that networking and getting involved, having those connections to you know, the area agencies on aging, the nonprofits that serve older adults, the key, you know, leaders in the aging space in Colorado was an important component of this job, because I served as sort of the connection to that community within the department. So I guess those are some of the key, you know, sort of aspects of that role and what the department was looking for.
Great, thanks, Hayley. Michelle, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the answer, you know, at the highest level is they're looking for technical skills, but they're also looking for personal skills, soft skills. And so, you know, that was for myself in all of my jobs that I've obtained, but also I hire a lot of PhDs. The supervisors that work for me hire a lot of PhDs. And so, you know, with the PhD, you're getting a certain level of technical skills. But then what you want to see on top of it for a non-academic career are those soft skills. So some of what Hayley was saying about networking and ability to translate information, to speak to people, to get your ideas across, all of that. So, you know, right now in my center, we hire a slew of people. We've had people who have had expertise in aging, but I also have statisticians, I've got PhD epidemiologists, I've got economists, I have psychologists, I mean, you name it. But those are the two things that, you know, in my career, but also who I hire, what I'm always looking for. It's that technical skill set a doctorate brings you, as well as the soft skills.
Wonderful, thanks. Joel, I have a question for you that I'm going to ask others, or I'm going to make a statement, and I'd like you to fill in the blank, so to speak. Because you mentioned right out of graduate school, and I remember how you suffered those 3 months when you went to the consulting firm. How would you finish, for all of our students and stuff, how would you finish the following sentence? You know, before I started that job search, here's what I really wish I had known.
I really wish I had known what the company actually did. You know, it was just, my advisor said, Joel, you got to take this job. It's a great job. And I sort of went, and, you know, anyway, that would be something that I think you should really understand what it is that they're expecting. You know, it does kind of tie in with some of the other observations that others have made, and that, you know, if they're interviewing you, they are interested in an inquisitive approach to the job. There are lots of government, state governments, city governments, you know, whatever, that are not interested in PhDs. You know, we tend to be a skeptical sort, right? We tend to go, how do you know that, right? How do you know that's true? And you know, if the place is not interested in skepticism, then you don't want to go there.
You know, I want to reiterate something you said, which is really important. And that is, I think when we tend to go for our first jobs, we're selling ourselves. But it's really important that you go in with two attitudes. One is they also have to sell themselves on you. Do the due diligence. Find out what that job really entails. Sometimes the title has nothing to do with what you actually end up doing. Really important to take the time to do that. So, Hayley, how would you complete that sentence? Here's what I really wish I had known before I did my first job search.
That's hard, actually. I feel like for me, most of my jobs ended up almost falling in my lap a bit. I think just, so I think for taking a chance on things, which I think I was willing to do. So I think people have to be willing to just sort of jump in and take a chance on starting out. And I I think I would say, and this isn't really about job search, but what would I have told myself? It's that, you're not going to be like, you don't have to be perfect at your job on day one. Like, I think for a lot of us, we're achievers, right? And we're, head down, we want to do well. And a lot of this policy work in particular is really hard. And so, I mean, I've been at Medicaid now for 2.5 years here in Colorado, and I feel like I'm still learning every single day. And so I think just being okay with being new and learning and not knowing all the answers.
Wonderful. Michelle, how would you finish that sentence?
I think I would take what Joel said and actually take it a step further. It's not just knowing what the company does, but it's also knowing how they do it. I can confidently say I have had a job or two where I was really attracted by what the organization or the department or the agency did, but I was not fully aware of the fact that, for example, they did not have much of a research budget, or how their org structure was going and that they were going to change it, things like that. So I think doing your homework is really important, which I think goes to what you said, Mark, about selling yourself. They're selling themselves on you as much as you are on them. So
great, thanks. Verena, would you like to add anything? How would you finish that sentence?
Actually, I didn't have to do that. I was like, nearly, I mean, my first job, sort of, I mean, I was already working at that research institute, and they kept promoting me. So, but I think that doing research, I've also often looked, for example, on there, like these, I'm blocking on the name now, what is called Charity Navigator, where you can check out a lot of nonprofits and how much, whatever the CEO makes, how much do they invest in. So you can look at their tax forms, right? And that gives you and then you also know who the players are within the organization. And I also wanted to mention something, Mark, before I forget. It may not always be that you are the one who sees an advertisement and you're applying for the job, right? You could also be in a situation, or you could create a situation where you create a job for yourself, right? I've had colleagues who did an internship. For example, one of them did an internship here at a nursing home, and they didn't have a research function, but they had a little bit of money, so they supported her, and she became the research director. So what I'm saying is, like, sometimes it's that's it. So you're basically making a job.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Verena, if I understood you correctly, there's a time and a place, and it may happen more often than you think, to be opportunistic. And especially if you see a gap that needs to be filled in an organization, putting yourself out there and forward, people generally appreciate that, because it means that you're displaying a commitment to the organization. Are there things, let's fast forward to your current role, okay? Are there things you weren't prepared for in your current
Mark, you should also check the chats. There's a couple of questions from the chats.
Yes, I will. How about that? You know what? I'm going to do those first then. Okay. So one of the questions that we got from Shayna is, what are your opinions and thoughts about staying in academia while you write your dissertation versus taking a non-academic job part-time while you're dissertating? Joel, I'll start with you.
Yeah. In my case, as you've all heard, I didn't like the job. When I negotiated my job there, they said, you can work 4 days for us and then you can spend 1 day on your dissertation. But of course, they didn't tell me that I could spend that Friday on my dissertation, but then I'd have to spend Saturday and Sunday back at the job. And then when I left there and went to be a project manager, in an academic setting, there's support for what I was doing. And my boss was actually interested in my dissertation, and together we actually turned it into an article that got a lot of mention. It was 22 drafts, and, it was almost going to kill me, but it ended up being a very high impact publication. So, I had a lot more support there, just because it was the idea of a dissertation was more in line with the setting that I was in. That's an N of one. I think there are a lot of places that would support you, but again, it depends on your life situation, where you are, what your family is like, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really hard, but think about that, because it can be very difficult.
Yeah,
go ahead, Verena.
It really depends on the situation. Like, I was actually working full time while I was writing my dissertation, but the project, so I was a project coordinator of an NIH funded study, but I used part of the data from that study for my dissertation. So some things were a little bit blended with my job, which was okay. But actually what was helpful for me personally at some point in my dissertation writing was I actually started to work a 6th day. I went to the office on Saturday and said, I'm going to spend the whole day writing on my dissertation. So I felt like having a full-time job kept me on track. I don't know what I would have done, but I don't know, it depends on your personality, right? Some people, like I thrive of a structured environment. Some people think like they will never get it done. But at least to answer the question, a part-time job while writing your dissertation, I would say is helpful.
There's a saying, which I'm sure everyone in these beautiful squares has heard, which is, if you want to get something done, you give it to a busy person. So I don't know, Hayley, if you want to agree with that, or you have a different view.
Well, I think I could speak to this because I just finished my dissertation a year ago, but it did take me, the whole program took me 9 years. And part of the reason for that was because I did work the whole time for the Home Care Aid Council, which is a nonprofit in Massachusetts, and then moved to my new job. So I was working throughout my time there. And yes, it took a lot longer than I may have liked. And so that maybe is the trade-off. But I also think that my work that I was doing while I was in the program, improved, sort of gave me a different perspective as I was going through classes and doing my dissertation. And it gave me all of this experience. So when I graduated and was done, I already had a job. So I think there's definitely a trade-off, but I wouldn't trade what I did. I think that it worked for me, but you have to find the right fit for yourself.
Michelle, you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think everything that my fellow speakers said. The only thing, if all things are considered equal and it's not a life circumstance or a personality thing that pushes you towards one or the other, it's the timing. Because you're going to have to get employed at some point when you finish your dissertation. So you need to think about the timing. And if you're going for a non-academic career, it may be more advantageous to take a job, or it may not, depending on when you think you'd finish. So.
Great, thank you. Very, very thoughtful answers. We did get another, I think, very interesting question, which is, in academia, the main pressure is, of course, especially if you're moving toward a tenure track position, is publish or perish. And I think this was Allison, right? Yes, who asked the question, well, is there a similar pressure when you're in a policy job? To move up in the policy arena, in the academic arena, it's fairly clear. What about the policy arena? Is there an analogous type of situation? So Michelle, I see moving back and forth a little bit, so I'm going to assume you might have an answer.
Yeah, I do. There's a lot of, at least, in what I do, it's very fast paced. What I was, one of the pressures that I had not experienced and hope to never experience again was some of what happened between 2016 and 2020. It was a very interesting and different kind of a fast-paced pressure that, for example, you get asked to do things that you may not agree with, or you may be thrown in or thrown to the wolves. That sounds strange, but in a policy environment, you know, while you may not be the lobbyist or the advocate, you know, those people are out there. It's a big piece of policy and getting policy and programs to be made and funded. And so sort of dealing with that brings its own inherent set of pressures. And sometimes
Right. Hayley,
they're very
do you
unusual.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
I was going to say something similar. I mean, I think that's very true. It's a different kind of pressure. It's very fast paced. There's a lot happening at one time. It's a lot of putting out fires. I also think, I mean, the flip side, what I like about the job, like I mentioned earlier, is the fact that you feel like you're making an impact. But I also think the flip side of that is there's a lot of pressure and responsibility in the decisions that you're making. You know, over the past year, I was moved to COVID response, and we were making all of the policy decisions related to our residential care settings. And so decisions we were making about, you know, visitation and infection prevention, you know, measures that needed to be done and reporting, like all of those decisions we knew actually impacted people living or dying. I mean, you sort of have this different level of pressure in terms of how important the decisions you make and how they really impact people and families and all, you know, the workers in those facilities and all of those things. So I think it just is a little bit, it's just different in terms of what kind of pressure is put on you.
Joel, do you want to add anything, since I know you got called into public service and then went back to academia, when you compare the like pressure points?
Yes, I'll tell you one interesting anecdote. When I was working on bringing in insurance companies, I'm gonna blow this anecdote, but all I know is I got a visit from the legal counsel for the EOHHS office, who said that I made a horrible mistake and that I probably, if not going to jail, would ruin the entire project. And it turns out I had checked with the Attorney's General office before that, who had actually given me the go-ahead. And so in an informal way, but there were a couple of days when I had to get back in touch with the AG's office and say, did I really screw up or not? And it's just that the legal counsel for EOHHS was extremely risk averse. So I think just in general, do we have any lawyers on the panel? No. You know, you probably all have dealt with this, and you know, there are very, very risk averse legal departments. And I tell people here, sort of another general sort of career advice: you want to risk manage, not avoid risk. You don't want to avoid risk; you want to manage risk. And I think that was a constant pressure, and it's still a pressure today. You know, in doing things and futzing around with federal budgets and doing what I can, you know, and just yeah. So that was the pressure that I had in government, just dealing with the constant legal input that was just restricting anything that we wanted to do.
Thank you, Joel. So we have one more question, and I'm actually going to take the first answer. Let me tell you, the question is, how do people with a PhD who don't have an academic job stay involved in academic writing and research? If they do independent research, how do they work through issues like human subjects research, get access to universities, and so on? I'll be short and to the point. All of us, I think, through our PhD training, feel that we have an obligation to contribute to the knowledge base. When I went into the private sector, I felt that part of being a good corporate citizen was to publish and expand the knowledge base. It doesn't matter what sector you're in, you have to have a strong sense that that's important. Number two, and now there are more opportunities, get affiliated with an academic institution, become a fellow in Jan's Center or our center or the Gerontology Institute. When you do that, you then get access to human subjects, IRB, and so on. So just because you don't choose an academic path doesn't mean you have to disaffiliate. Michelle, anything you'd like to add?
I agree with all that. I mean, I've continued, even though it's not a job requirement, never has been for me, I've continued to publish constantly. I think the difference for me is that now I am publishing because I want to. So I published recently in the Annals of Internal Medicine on maternal mortality because, we had data that said something really important and I wanted to get the message out there. So I think what you said, Mark, is correct. You can find affiliates, you find other like-minded people. Another piece is that you can do it on your own. If you are attempting to publish a policy piece, if there's a public use data set, which there are many out there that you have the time to analyze, and there's something that a research question you want to answer, you can do it. You can make the time for it.
Thanks. Hayley?
Yeah, I agree with what Mark and Michelle said. I would say I haven't quite figured out how to make it fit in my life at this moment. Thanks to Dr. Miller, I was able to publish one paper off of my dissertation and hope to continue to do that. But it is a balancing act. I mean, when your job is 40 to 60 hours a week, and part of the job does not include publishing, you do have to find a time to, outside of work to carve that out. And so for me, it hasn't been easy, but it is something that I want to continue to do, and that I think you can make work, like you both said. I just think it's finding the time.
Thank you. Verena?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of my job to publish. I mean, we don't, when you're in a non-profit setting, you don't really have, I mean, actually at my previous job, we had to publish or at least submit a certain number of articles a year, right? But it's not working, you're not working towards tenure. Plus, also in relationship with the dissemination work, to lay audiences, I just enjoy doing that. So it's not really an issue. And going back to the question, all the places that I worked at, like the LTSS and at UMass Boston, they seek out a relationship with an academic setting to get some of those benefits of an academic setting, right? Like an IRB. But for example, at the New Jewish Home, that geriatric healthcare organization that I worked for in New York City, we had our own IRB. So, and an affiliation with the Mount Sinai Medical School. So I think that's usually how all these places are set up. So
yeah, great. Well, listen, it's 9:15 where I am, but I know that the 15 probably applies to 1:15. So I want to, first of all, this has been so interesting. And I appreciate all of the insights. I've learned a lot about these non-academic career paths, and I think everyone joins me in thanking you all for sharing your insights and wisdom and experience and honesty about what has worked, what hasn't worked. So I think with that, we'll close unless, Evan, you wanted to have any last word, or that would be fine.
I just wanted to say what you're saying, essentially, thank you to all of the panelists and of course to you, Mark, for sharing your insights with us today. And on behalf of the SPO team, we hope you have a great day and thank you all for coming.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yes, thanks very much. Hayley, Michelle, Verena, Joel, thanks a lot.